All right, everyone, it's great to be with you today. We'll give everyone just a few minutes or a few seconds, I should say, rather, to log in. We've got a few of you piling in here today. Thank you for attending. It is the last day of March, if you can believe it. And if you operate off of our fiscal year, we are halfway through fiscal year 2022, which is mind-boggling for most of us. So I appreciate most of you being here. And we'll get started with some introductions in just a few seconds. All right, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here. My name is Liz Lenz. I just changed it from style, so I'm still the same person you've been seeing hopefully on many of these practice intelligence webinars. I really appreciate you being here. I am really excited for today's format because we're actually going to do this webinar a little bit differently than we have been in the past. And we probably grabbed your attention because the topic and the headline was money in motion. And there's a lot of pieces of today's conversation I think are going to impact you and your teams. So we really hope you stay throughout the whole thing and engage with us the whole time. Meeting, I want to see your chats. I want to see your Q&A, right? We're open to that stuff. So this isn't a webinar where we don't want you to engage and sit back and listen to us for 50 minutes or an hour. I want you to actually engage with us. And we've got experts on the line here today because we want to engage. And here's the other thing. This is meant to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So hopefully that sets the tone for today. So first and foremost, I want to introduce Alexiss Rodriguez. Alexiss is with us today. And she is part of our Advisor Inclusion Network. She is a relationship manager, and she helped promote the webinar. She helped design the webinar, and she helped us give a little bit more insight on what her networks were looking for and how we can bring some of the thought leadership outside the networks to the rest of the firm. So Alexiss, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the partnership, and I'm so excited for this webinar. Hi, everyone.
Wonderful. Well, Alexiss is going to be here, and we're going to probably pull her back in because we're going to ask her a few questions along the way, but we really appreciate it. Cameo Robertson, I appreciate you being here too from Atlas Park. You have your own company. You've been a thought leader in this space for a while. Many of you have probably seen Cameo. If you don't see her, likely now you should follow her on LinkedIn. She's got a lot to say. She's got a lot of thought leadership. Cameo, I had your bio in front of you before my computer crashed. So would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, happy to. Thank you so much for the invitation, Liz, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Cameo Roberson, founder and CEO of Atlas Park Consulting, a coaching and practice management platform for financial advisory firms. We work with clients who are looking to start up, grow, and scale their practices, and I'm excited to be here with Liz and Quinton, talking to everyone about money in motion and what advisors can do to really prepare themselves to serve the investors of the future.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you giving an intro, a little bio of yourself. Any tips before we get started? What, if you're a listener on here today, what should we remind the audience before we have this sort of intense conversation? So what would you tell everyone if they're attending?
What I would share with everyone really is, as Liz mentioned, this is more of a conversation, right? And so our unique experiences can really enrich and transform perspectives. So we encourage you to share, and we will absolutely do the same in sharing some personal stories with you. And then also honesty and transparency, right, goes a long way in making authentic connections. We're going to be talking about how you can make authentic connections with prospective clients, prospective team members. And so as we get started, I'd simply ask everyone to remember that there's more similarities in this virtual Zoom room than differences. And your experiences can really encourage others to step outside of the box. And so if something is shared today that really resonates with you, please share it in the chat box so that everyone can be informed.
Love it. Thank you so much, Cameo, for sharing that. And then our other panelist, last but not least, it's Quinton Alston-Spratt. He is, I just missed this man in Philadelphia. We were both at the Philadelphia PCG Regional Conference. We heard great feedback already from your session. Quinton, you are with Franklin Templeton Investments, who is helped sponsor this event today. So we really appreciate you being here. So same quick question to you. Tell us a little bit about you and then some advice you have for the listeners today.
Sure. So first of all, thank you. Hi, Kelly. Kelly just sent me a hi, Quinton, in the comments. So hi, Kelly. I'm seeing some familiar friends and names in the comments. So hello to all of you. My name is Quinton Alston-Spratt, Head of Advisor Practice Management with Franklin Templeton. Some thoughts on today. Today is going to be just a really open conversation. One of the things I would like to encourage you, like Cameo said, be open to today's conversation. Normally, when I do this in person, what I like to do is I kind of like to lay some ground rules before we start this talk. And I'm just going to do that now, if that's okay, Liz. So Liz says yes. So when I do this in person, what I ask you to do before we go into this conversation is I ask for a verbal commitment. And what I ask you to do is to drop your titles. For the next 53 minutes, just let them go. And I'm going to ask you to commit to being people who want to master your craft, and that's building better relationships with the people that you work with. That's it. In order to drop your title, that means you're going to need to be vulnerable in this conversation and be open to some alternative perspectives. The next thing that I ask people to do when we have this talk, I'm going to ask you to drop your judgment. That's your judgment of other people. That's your judgment of you. More importantly, that's your own judgment of your thoughts. But you know what? In 54 minutes, if you want to judge yourself after, you're welcome to do it again, but I need you to let it go for 53 minutes. That's the best thing I can ask you to do in this conversation, to really create the space to have the conversation we need to have. So that being said, Liz, I'm looking forward to having our conversation. And I'll turn it back to you.
Well, I appreciate you setting the tone for that with today's conversation. So a couple quick things. I love everyone keep chatting in. And so, the titles is money in motion. So we're like, wow, is this going to be that intense of a conversation? What are we talking about here? And, one of the reasons why we got to this point where we felt like this is more of a discussion than a presentation is because this is so much deeper than just seeing where the money is going and having the right business development activities to capture those new business opportunities. It's all about engaging differently with our clients and with prospective clients along the way. And that's why today's conversation is so important. So when we think about money in motion, Quinton, you have some great content you've been speaking on. It's called Changing Faces of Wealth. And it's a really intriguing topic because really it gets to talk about the client of the future. And what do we exactly mean by that? Like, what is the client of the future? So I want to kind of get this sense around. We know that money's in motion. We know it's changing hands to a different, probably face of the type of client that we're seeing before. We know that the client of the future maybe looks different than the client right now. So when we talk about this great wealth transfer, what do we really mean by that? Like, what is the greatest wealth transfer? Let's start there. So
let's start there. The great wealth transfer. Listen, everybody's been telling us this great wealth transfer, it's coming. I tell people, newsflash, it's actually here. So the great wealth transfer is where $68 trillion is going to pass from one generation to the next. What's unique about this great wealth transfer is that while a lot of money is going to be going from hand to hand, those hands are going to look very different in the next couple of years. And if the hands are going to be different, that means the people are going to be different. If the people are different, that means the faces are different. And that's why we call this program the Changing Faces of Wealth. Now, what's unique about this is how quickly the numbers change. When we wrote this, the number was 68. Reports come out that number is actually more towards 73 trillion now.
Yeah.
Roughly 30 trillion going to millennials, roughly 27 or so going to Gen Y, another 11 or so going to Gen Z. So the question that we're asking ourselves, which made us write this, was how do we help people position themselves to capture these opportunities?
Absolutely. So what trends are you seeing there? So like numbers are changing already.
Yes.
What trends are you seeing with future generations? So I would imagine my priorities are different than my parents' priorities. As an easy example, I'll throw myself in there. So how are they different than generations prior? And Cameo, I see you nodding your head a lot while Quinton was talking. How about you chime in here? What trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that's such a key point to make, right? And when you think about trends that I'm seeing in my corporate experience working for private RIAs, and then now as a coach to financial advisors under my own firm, there's really a dynamic that's been brewing for some time now. So when I think about future generations and how their priorities and principles can be different from generations prior, we see that they aren't necessarily staying with the advisor of previous generations. And I think this is for a number of reasons. One being they don't have a relationship with the advisor. They really don't know them. Their priorities for how they want to live their lives may be different from previous generations. And then really wanting to work with a diverse team that understands them at a core level. And what I'm also seeing is part of that understanding of serving the client of the future is really digging deeper into what's important to them and what motivates them and how they want to live their lives.
So what's interesting too is the clients are changing. It seems like the team would need to change too, and the teams are changing, right? We see our advisory teams evolving already. So I know you work a lot in this space too, Cameo. So I think the client expectations is different, but later on in this conversation, I'd love to get your perspective on how teams are changing too.
Yeah,
Because
happy
you're
to.
looking at it from both
Happy to.
sides.
And one other item I will throw in here, since we're talking about teams and serving the needs of the investor of the future, is a big trend we're seeing is representation.
Yeah.
People want to see individuals who look like them. So when you think about from a teaming perspective, advisors who can adapt and start building those diverse teams stand a better chance of really connecting with those diverse advisors. And I'm just going to put this out here. Gone are the days where you can just throw images of diverse people on your website and expect blanket buy-in. The investors of today want to see that you can talk the talk and actually walk the walk. What does your team look like? They're going to want to see exactly who you're working with.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk a lot, especially now post-pandemic, about what's motivating clients to pick advisors and advisory teams. And obviously what you do and how you do it needs to be consistent with who you are. But the clients really buy into who you are and the similarities they see in themselves, in you, in your team, maybe some of the values, background, cultures, preferences, things like that are so interesting and motivating to somebody on a deeper level than what you can just provide as a financial professional.
Absolutely.
So Quinton, I'm going to throw this back to you.
Sure.
So what does this next generation client look like? So I know you have some interesting intel. Do you mind if I share the graph
absolutely. And we'll talk about what we're seeing trends in the space also from the client perspective. Number one, as this comes up here, when we go through this chart, the way I like to frame this, I'm going to ask you all to take a look at the year 2015. 2015 is your anchor year in this conversation. When we took a look at this data, we took a look at 50 years back and we took a look at a projection of 50 years forward. And what you see amongst these ethnic groups is that the Black or African American community is going to stay relatively stable over time. You're seeing exponential growth in the Latino Hispanic community. You're also seeing growth in the category known as AAPI. Now, depending where I am in the country, I don't have to explain this, but for the sake of everyone else, I'm going to say that the AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So what we're seeing is that this country is becoming more and more diverse. These three groups in the year 2015 represented roughly 36% of our population. They're going to be over half in the next couple of years. And it's not just by ethnicity, it's also by age. You're seeing diversity amongst millennials, and that's people born in between 1981 and 1996. 44% of them are people of color. The next generation, 48% of them are people of color. Here's what this really means. It doesn't matter who you are in this room, whether it's myself, whether it's you, whether it's Crystal Alfred Cooper on the line, good to see you. We all have to get better at having conversations with people that don't look like us. Liz, like you said, and Cameo, like you said, people who don't share the same background as us. And we have to learn how to connect with them more effectively. That's the point of why we're having the conversation today.
Well, I love that here. And, to kind of point out a note here, what motivated Franklin Templeton to go so deep on this research? I mean, this is clearly something we all need to pay attention to. So what was Franklin Templeton's motivation in creating this? Can you give me an idea of the color there?
Absolutely. The short answer, there were a lot of people asking if we had anything in this space because there weren't a lot of firms out there taking a position. And so we decided to take a position to start doing the work. And we had a great team who came together, who put this together, from marketing to the Franklin Templeton Academy to going to our business resource groups, our BRGs, to make sure that the data and the stories that we're telling are accurate, to going out to clients and seeking perspective. This is a full effort. And if there's a story that's missing, that you think is missing, and you're watching this, we want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. Because we do make changes and make updates, because it's not just the Franklin Templeton story, it's all of our stories. And that's why we built this.
Sure. And the slide that I love here, and I'm going to keep sharing my screen here if you can see it. This 2020 census data is really intriguing for me. Can you give me some highlights here of the data you guys found and going deeper in this topic here?
Absolutely. So this slide, a lot of things going on here, but let's keep this. I'm from the South. I'm from Georgia. I like to keep things simple. So
we love that, Quinton. Keep it simple for us.
Keep it simple. Okay. So we got 2010, 2020, and what you're going to see is a shift in the demographics. You see a drop amongst white Americans in this country, but where you see growth is between the purple, the Latino Hispanic community. You see growth between the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. What you also see growth is with individuals identifying as more than one race. It's not just the broader census data that we see. This also happens by age as well. So this data is reflected in individuals 18 and under. So what does this mean? If you're building the practice of today and looking at building the practice of tomorrow, you have to consider where the demographics in this country are going and how are you going to be poised to meet those needs. I don't want to front run something that's going to help us with that, but we're going to talk about how to make sure we're prepared to have those conversations.
I love it. So, so tell me a little bit about, you said diversity dimensions, right? You mentioned dimensions. So what are the dimensions that you focus on at this point? I think we had a few up here, but I would love to see some of the dimensions here and you talk through some of these. So these are some definitely different groups and maybe some groups that overlap one another. Tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So when we did this program, we called these 6 different groups diversity dimensions. We have women over 50, Latino Hispanic investors, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Black or African American investors, LGBTQ+, and millennials. Now, when we wrote this, some people say, well, Q, that's not everyone. I know. We had to start somewhere. And these groups were the most represented groups. And the other reason we started here is the joke I say is like, listen, if we wrote a program for everyone, it wouldn't be 50 minutes. And I don't know how much you would like me at the end of it. But
you would be talking much faster than you're speaking now, Q.
Right.
Yes.
I agree, Liz.
Yes. So one of the things that really helps us paint a picture when we have this conversation is encourage you to find one group. Focus on one group that you think that if you focus on this group, it will help make a difference in your business. Maybe you have access to this group and you've been trying to figure out how do I do more with them? Hopefully in this conversation, we can share some insight that will help you go further, faster with them. Now, there's something I do need to talk about. And there's something called intersectionality, Liz. I'm going to say that again, intersectionality. My allergies are getting to me.
Intersection. What does that mean?
Okay.
Exactly. I've heard the term before. How do I kind of get it, right?
Yes.
I understand the concept, right? I had some Latin training in my early education years, but how do I apply this to this conversation?
All right. So here's what I'm gonna have everyone do. I'm gonna have everyone take their hands like this. I know I can't see you, but I'm gonna trust you. So I'm gonna have you take your hands like this. Okay. Now, intersectionality is where these groups start to overlap. So you can be a woman over 50 who's part of the Black or African American community, who's also part of the LGBTQ plus community. And if we're really gonna help people go further, help them achieve better outcomes, you have to be able to understand the nuances of all three of these things for that individual.
Mhm.
So when I did this in person one time, I pop quizzed the group. I said, what is intersectionality? Midway through the conversation, and nobody could remember what it was. And then one young
So should
lady in
we
the
do a
back went
pop
like
quiz?
this.
Is that what we're saying here?
We're saying we should do a pop quiz.
Okay, all right, everyone. I remember the hand thing. I hope you do too.
And that's what happened, Liz. I had a young lady in the back go just like this, and the entire room got it.
I got it.
So we have to consider these things because we have to deal with the whole person. Otherwise, we run a huge risk of creating a blind spot in the plan, or creating a shortfall, or creating a gap between the next generation that you can serve.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is that, my job at the firm is to help advisors, gather best practices and consider a bunch of different things. Intersectionality and thinking about there's best practices probably for all these different groups that you mentioned, and Cameo, Quinton, them, layering them on top of one another, right? And considering all these things, it can be a little tough.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to remember all of them? How do I keep track of it? Like, let's real talk a little bit, like what's the best way to start to consider all these things to make sure that I'm checking, if you will, all the boxes and serving this person in the best way possible? What's the
Yeah.
best way to do that?
I think it starts with being curious and getting to know the individuals, asking questions, taking a vested interest in who they are so that you can best understand who they are as individuals and then start to come up with the right services to meet their needs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can tell you from personal experience, when individuals take an interest in who I am as a Black woman, it helps me to be even more open to share with those individuals.
Sure. This is where I think I want to pull in Alexiss too. Alexiss, we introduced you at the beginning of the session here. And one of the things in our prep calls, you shared a story with us. I'd love for you to share again because you just picked a financial advisor. So tell us a little bit about your journey and picking one and what you were looking for and maybe what you didn't want and what you found and how you made that decision.
Yeah, thank you all. And, when we were prepping for these conversations and everyone was going over, what we wanted to talk about, I felt so inclined to be like, wait, are we talking about me? I felt like, some of these diversity dimensions were really hitting on me. I'm Hispanic, I'm a woman, 25. And so I was recently engaging with my parents' financial advisor. And so when that happened, our first initial conversation, I just had to sign a couple papers. And he was like, let me know if you have any questions. So when my turn came up and I was ready to build a relationship with an advisor, this was a person I didn't even consider to engage with because I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I can ask the right questions as a new investor. Sometimes those silly, stupid questions. I needed someone that I can relate to. So I went with a woman. I went with a Black woman because I wanted to have that relationship that was even similar to my age, where I can go and ask questions and they can understand what my financial needs are. And so I'm really happy with my advisor. And so that's kind of like my story here.
So any questions, Quinton, Cameo, that you may have for Alexiss? I have one, so my first question is, how did you find this person? Like, how did you come across them? You've kind of got an inside scope here at Raymond James.
Yeah.
We're pretty fortunate at the home office. We have to work with a Raymond James advisor. So, how did you go about it? Did it take 6 months? Did it take a few months? Like, give me a little color there.
So I'm pretty lucky just in the role that I am as a relationship manager and primarily managing the Black Financial Advisors Network. So I already have a huge exposure to all the amazing advisors in the network, but this person in particular, I had seen some of their financial literacy sessions that they put on for the firm for our younger group, we have an inclusion network for associates called Emerge. I've attended those. And so some of those basic fundamentals I had never heard of, and that's what I needed to hear. And so it wasn't easy. It probably took me a couple months to finally reach out, but this person you can see her everywhere on LinkedIn, and she's someone that really puts her marketing materials easily digestible for people like me.
Wonderful. Great strategy if we have advisors looking for more clients like you that are like-minded. Alexiss, I appreciate you sharing your story. Quinton, Cameo, I know we talked about this too, is, a personal story for me. I have been at the firm for 10 years this year. I mostly did all of my stuff myself. After I got married, my husband and I chose an advisor. My stepson, who's adopted, is Black, and my older brother is mixed. And one of the things that I wanted to look for was an advisory team that was more diverse as well. I ended up choosing a main advisor and his team. And one of the main advisors, who's my primary guy, is a Black African-American advisor. And I love working with him, and I feel very comfortable with it. And, this was someone that's so different than my parents, right? My parents ended up choosing somebody else. I don't know who they are. I don't really care to work with them. They just retired, just got an advisor. And with advisors serving the parents, right? Next generation millennials will be the caregiver. So this guy has not reached out to me. This guy doesn't even know who I am. But if something ever happens to my mom and dad, I'd have to take care of them and probably work with this other advisor. So let's say you're on the other end of the spectrum. You're the advisor, got clients, and their son or daughter may be very different from you, right? Maybe they're a millennial like me. Maybe they are one of the other diversity dimensions. How should intersectionality, play into how they serve me? What considerations? What are the best practices? So Cameo, if you won't mind, I'll start with you and you can give me your take on it.
Yeah, one thing I want to share, Liz, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it goes back to what I was sharing earlier about having representation. You wanted representation for your son. And so that's one of the first things that you can think about when it comes to intersectionality. What do your clients want? If they want to work with someone who potentially looks like them, that's a first consideration that you can look at. And then also from Alexiss's story and just my understanding of Latino families, there's a very interconnected family dynamic there, and family generations often live with one another. And so if you're coming in and you're serving a millennial Latino investor, you also want to think about the concerns of their extended family as well. I think that's important to look at.
So how do I do that? Do I just ask more questions? Like, should I engage? Like, if you were my parents' advisor, it's a good question. What advice would you tell him right now about me other than run? What would you tell him? I mean, I loved your be curious comment. But like, what's something tactical, like an action item he could do right now?
Yeah, great question. I think a few things the advisor could do is to be a little bit more proactive with the parents' relationship. Knowing that the parents have put in some investments for Alexiss, maybe asking them when it would be a good time to introduce Alexiss into some of these conversations, start relationship building earlier. Also reaching out to Alexiss to see if she had any questions about the nature of any investments made on her behalf, really figuring out, what her needs are. And then also just thinking about, her future goals and being able to check in and see if there's something that they might be able to assist with.
Sure. I love that.
Asking questions, being inquisitive.
Yeah, and I think that goes, you may have just answered one of the Q&A questions that we had in the chat. And Alexiss, I think you're getting pulled here again. Josh had a really good question. Like, what could, Cameo just gave us some great responses. Like, what could that advisor done differently to make you feel more comfortable in working with them?
Yeah, Cameo really hit the nail on the head. Really just wanting to get to know me, where I was. I had just accepted an offer at Raymond James when we even started this. So what did that look like for me long term? What did I currently have? So I really wish that initial meeting was less of a, here, I'm sending you some DocuSigns, and more of a, do you even know what you're signing? Do you know what's going on? Because I still to this day, I probably would not be able to tell you what happened there. So I just really wish we would have established a little bit of that foundation of what am I doing, and then how can I, get something out of this or do something personally for myself.
That's a 5-minute phone call, right? So isn't that interesting? I talked about this yesterday. Sometimes the very short time commitment to a very meaningful action can make or break that client relationship and the longevity of that client relationship. So that's
Absolutely.
really interesting. In terms of like making your network more diverse, right? Cameo, where would you start if you were the advisor and saying, okay, I don't have enough representation on my team. I probably should work with different partners. Like how do I solve this problem? I'm caring more. I promise to put in more effort, but how do I continue to be, I don't know, networked with a group that's bigger than my existing community I've surrounded myself with?
Yeah, that's great. Before I answer that question, I want to add one other tip that I just thought of what advisors can do. Alexiss talked about kind of life events that she's going through, starting a new job, figuring out kind of what her next step should be. So one thing that I saw in my corporate career was that when a child or minor turned of age 18 or 21, depending on the state, and they had a custodial account, that was then an opportunity for the advisor to reach out and to start having that conversation with that minor child. And so if you're thinking about when is a good time to potentially engage with the next generation of investors, look at life events that the individual may be going through, as well as if there's a custodial account change that's going to be happening. It's a great opportunity to think about that we don't always look at for face value. Now, to your second question, Liz, about what advisors can do to really start diversifying their networks, getting diverse team members, and really figuring out, what they should be doing. One of the first things, when I think about, the top 2 groups that came out of the poll that we talked about earlier were women over 50 and millennials. And one of the first things you can do is consider reaching out to diverse individuals on LinkedIn. That's one area that you can think about in terms of diversifying your network.
I love it. So just being a little bit more exposed to Quinton. You have your finger up. Just jump in, buddy.
I'm taking notes. I'm trying to keep my thoughts together, right? So
I love it.
I want to go back to the last point that I think it was Josh made about what could they have done differently. What's something we can tangibly do? So a couple of things. One of the things I find working in this space, and what makes me kind of unique in this space is I don't really deal with product, I deal with people. That's why you have a bunch of upside down heads on my wall here. My background is behavioral psychology. So what I find in this space is a lot of people spend so much time trying to be professionals and they forget to be people. And that's what Alexiss was looking for in that conversation. And so one of the things that you can do is leverage the family meeting structure to help introduce you to the next generation. So we talked about women over 50 and millennials being a big area of focus here. We have a separate program that we focus on, right? And I'm going to try to pick up Nicole's point. Many of our clients are under 40. Children are under 40. Very difficult to communicate with. They don't answer voicemails. They don't return our emails. Nicole, we're going to take care of this, right? So there are 4 different types of family. I said 4. There are 4 different types of family meetings that you can run. And I'm going to tangibly give them out here quickly. Number 1, you can run the introductory meeting with the family. By the way, I'm not going to say you do this with all your clients. I recommend you do it with your top 20, top 25. If you do 4, that's 100 new meetings a year, right? So think about this. So it's the introduction to the family meeting. And with that, you're going to meet with the head of household and you're going to talk about how you want and need to be introduced so that the family gets it. And it's a chance for you to sit down and have an open conversation about what you do, how you serve, and go from there. The next type of meeting you can do is a meeting about housing. And we talked about this with Liz. You gave your situation. You said, hey, listen, if something happens to my parents, I'm responsible.
Mm-hmm.
But no one ever asked the question, where are your parents going to go to age? And there's 5 different places your parents will go to the age. And you can do this meeting 1 or 2 ways. If your parents already know where they're going to age, you can help them create a conversation to talk to the kids about it. So there's no resentment. We've all been a part of that conversation. If they don't know where they're going to age, you can help them understand these 5 different places and help the family have a conversation so that when life happens, they know you're vested with them and they're not likely to take those assets somewhere else. The third type of meeting, this is about investment philosophy. This isn't talking about account values, so people get squeamish at the table. This is talking about what is our investment philosophy, and if life happens, how do we keep this plan in place rather than everyone else having an opinion? True story on that one. The last one, this is about helping the family understand the why, helping the family determine their mission statement. Why are they doing this? Is it because the family believes in education? Is it because the family believes in legacy? But they need to be able to tell this story. Now, true story, the first time I delivered Changing Faces of Wealth, I had an advisor approach me in the lunch line. And he said, the whole time you were talking, my phone was ringing nonstop. And my best client just died, and his wife calls me every 3 hours, and she asked me, what would he do? If you are having that meeting number 3 about investment philosophy, she wouldn't be asking that advisor that question. She would already know. And if we're going to build deeper relationship with the women and the children, we have to start here. So that way, when life happens, they don't leave us. They actually see us as an anchor to their situation. So Nicole, I hope I picked that up. Josh, I hope I picked it up in a tangible way for you too. I'll pause. I'll pass it back to Liz.
Absolutely. I'd love to chime in on that. Quinton, I love that framing, right? When I work with my clients in helping them really figure out how to systematize and get things in order, one of the things that we cover is how are you going to conduct these meetings with clients? And so just from a process perspective, so that you don't have to continually recreate the wheel, being intentional on the front end and figuring out how you want to have these conversations. Because when you're in the heat of the moment, when that client is calling you, when you're having that meeting, you want to make sure that you're touching on all the points that are going to be important to them, and some prep work in advance. You know, those meetings that you just mentioned, Quinton, I think are a great framework for advisors on this call today to adopt and to start to use.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, and why we're kind of on that point, you know, we're going to, at the end of this call, which we're getting close to it, this is already a pretty full conversation, which we had a feeling it would be. We want to give you a little bit of insight of how to work more specifically with these dimensions that Quinton referenced. So I'm going to pull up a poll. I'm going to launch the poll, and I would love for everyone to answer it so we know where to focus the remaining part of this conversation. If you could only focus on one investor group, which investor group would be most impactful to your business? And the reason why we're asking you this is we're going to show you a little insight today, but if we have deeper conversations on any one of these groups, and I know that we can spend at least an hour on every single dimension that was mentioned, we want to be able to do that or tee up more educational opportunities for these groups. So I'm going to keep the poll going for just a few minutes here so that we have an idea of where this conversation is going. But in the meantime, we talked a little bit about family succession type of scenarios, right? And you triggered something with me. I have to ask my parents where they're going to age, and I know they're going to want to move in with me. So I better start saving for a bigger home, because they are not going to be this close to my bedroom if they move in with me. And I love them to death, but you know. So anyhow, you know, there's succession, and then there's succession as it relates to advisors. Right? Let's say you're an advisor and you're sitting on this call and you're saying, you know, Liz, you know me, I've got 5 to 10 years left. Cameo, Quinton, why should I care? Right? Why now? This next generation group may or may not be here when I got to worry about growth so much. So what would you say to that? And Quinton, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So when I work with advisors or teams of advisors, the first question I always ask is, how do you want to walk away from this business? That's like right after names. Hey, Liz, my name's, hey, how do you want to walk away from this business?
Right.
Because how you want to walk away really is going to impact what kind of business you build. And if you want to build something that's going to last, something that you can continue to draw from, something that you can continue to be profitable for, You have to build a business that's going to make sense when you pass it to the next person. If you don't, it's almost like band-aidish.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave? You know, you
Right.
think about, you've built this business, right? 20, 30 years plus, great relationships with clients. They find you as their trusted advisor.
Mhm.
You want to just hand them over to someone who doesn't, is not in alignment with your values, with your culture, and throw away all of that value that you provided to them over the years. So it's a hard question to ask, but I think it's one that's truly valuable. And when we think about always putting ourselves in the position to best serve our clients, well, beyond you as the firm owner, they still need to be served well. And you have an important choice to make.
Well, and one thing I was going to mention here is that, many of you know I worked in succession planning and acquisitions for a long time, and a lot of our deals have retention components in it,
Yes.
right? You got to retain those clients and the longevity of that client relationship. So what's that client relationship look like in 10 years, right? And how are you going to ensure that those assets, that money in motion continues to stay
Right.
to maximize your deal? Okay, if you have no other motivation to be selfish here, right? You've got a deal on the table. You want to make sure that you maximize your deal and you're taking care of this new advisory practice in the future. So I think my internet was a little unstable here. So hopefully you caught all that.
You did.
Okay, great. So tell me a little bit about, building diverse teams. I'm looking for a succession partner that can continue to evolve the practice. That's why we're talking about this. Teams are in many cases the way of the future of an advisory practice.
Mhm.
And by the way, I classify team is not a bunch of lead advisors together. It's
Right.
any set of professionals working together, because we don't have to have all advisors and sales assistants. It can be a little bit more dynamic than that. So how do I build a diverse team? Cameo, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I'd say first off is really embracing the need to build authentic connections and expanding your network to reflect in the audience you aim to serve, really being intentional about that. Next, I'd say taking an honest assessment of your network and see who's there. If you're an individual who may not have an as diverse network, that's kind of the first step, right? And then you can figure out, who you can connect with to help you diversify that network. One of the other things I'd say, if you're looking to build that network, is you can think about attending local chamber of commerce events or other business networking events outside of your home city to connect with individuals you don't know. And also, let's not forget, how easy it is now to connect with people digitally on LinkedIn, and that's a great way to diversify your network.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny enough, Cameo, you and I met because Renee mentioned that we should get connected. It might be someone and I looked you up on LinkedIn, and that's how we became fast friends.
Yeah, and here
Now
we
I
are.
follow your content. Yeah.
It works. It absolutely works.
So what are the sources of making your network more diverse? I mean, LinkedIn is one of them. What are some other sources, anecdotally, Cameo, that you could share with us?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great one. Individual networking groups is also another one. I'll share a quick story with you. I'm a member of a group called Provisors, and it's a network of about 6,000 plus professionals across the country with more than 10 years of experience. And knowing that I have to be intentional, there was a woman that I connected with, and she actually had mentioned, she was transparent. And she said, I'm having trouble connecting with Black professionals. I would love to be able to do that. So she, one, acknowledged that there was a need. And two, she acknowledged wanting to connect with Black professionals. And so I chimed up in that virtual breakout room that we were in and said, you know what? I know a lot of Black professionals. I'd love to be able to connect you. And so her and I then connected on a separate call, got to know one another better. She's on the East Coast and I'm on the West Coast. And so it has been great getting to know her better and then also introducing her to my network and vice versa. So it was really just putting myself out there, right? And so I would encourage everyone, if you're in these networking groups, put your need out there, put your
Yes.
big ask out there. Don't be afraid, because you never know who is primed to help you meet that need.
I love that. Fantastic. And I know there's some specific resources that we're going to share at the end of this conversation of networking groups and places where you could get more diversity in your network. Quinton, anything else you want to add to Cameo's
Yeah.
comments?
I would agree. So number one, yes, diversifying your team is always a great idea, but sometimes people can't diversify their team for whatever their reasons are right at the moment. If you can't diversify your team, you can diversify your perspective.
Mhm.
And what we're going to do is we're going to put together some resources, but I want to encourage you as a team, as your leadership team, whoever's on it. There's like Harvard's implicit bias test, Cornell has tests. And what you can do is it helps you identify your biases. Because if you never identify them, they never get worked on. And so if you can create a safe space for you and your group so you can have better conversations, that's a great way to start.
Right.
Cameo talked about groups and she talked about being transparent. And I wrote down vulnerability. If you want the people around you to be vulnerable with you, then you have to be vulnerable with them. And that's what I love about that story, that that person was willing to come up and express their vulnerability and get something in return. So along those lines, there are a lot of organizations, whether, especially if you're looking to diversify your team, that you might be able to join or be, I'm going to use this term for lack of a better term, like an auxiliary member of, Quad A for short. Yes, I'm going to wave the flag, but Quad A for short. But join there and start to build your network in these different places. And it's not just Quad A, a lot of different groups have them. Women in financial services, I mean, you name them, and show up even if you're not a part of that group, and be willing to offer something to that group. And that's where the relationships start to flow.
I love that. And so it sounds like this is a long journey. So this stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? Like
No.
I'm not going to snap my fingers and feel better. Okay. So it's something, I mean, dare I say, maybe it's something we put in our personal and professional goals every year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yep. And being intentional. And one thing I will add to what Quinton just shared is look at who's in your office. Who's in your office that doesn't look like you, that you can reach out to today, introduce yourself, and figure out how you can best support one another. It doesn't have to be a big grandiose event or project. It could be something very small, very intentional, very close to home that you can do today.
Love that. Easy action step. Well, it's good. I mean, it's good for us as people. It's good for us in building teams that last with diverse perspectives. I want to share the results here because we're going back to money in motion, client of the future. So I know that Quinton and Cameo saw these results behind the scenes probably before I got to share them. But 47% of you wanted to learn about women over 50. And 33% millennial investors. So two, gender and age demographic topics. And then the next two are Black or African American investors, and then Latino or Hispanic investors, followed by the LGBTQ community and the AAPI group. So with that, I think we have time to maybe cover one or two of them. And if Quinton, if you're up for it, I want to get specific, like what should we do to best serve these clients, right? Like, and I don't want to just like get general information. I know you're the king of specific resources, right?
Yeah.
Like specific action items. So which group would you like to begin with? And how do you want to dive deep? And I'll show the appropriate slides depending on what you want to cover.
Let's go women over 50.
Okay.
That was the number one request, so we'll go there. And when working with this group, there are a couple of things to consider. Number one, this group has seen more women in the workplace. They've seen women earn more than ever before. They've seen women start more businesses. But you also got to consider the fact that they're outliving their male counterparts at a rate of 3 to 1. So think about that story I told with the young lady trying to reach out to her advisor, ask what will her husband do. If we want to work more effectively with this group, we're going to go with 3 quick tips here. Number one, we do have to personalize the experience. We've talked about this. We got to get to know them. This group wants to be active in the decision-making process, and active can be a rather vague term. So let me clear it up. This group tends to like to do their own research. They also want to be part of the process, which means it's not enough for you to say, hey, you're going to be fine, or this is going to generate this. Like, they want to understand why. And the reason why you have to personalize the experiences is because you have to be able to have outcome-based conversations. So I'm going to use that young lady whose husband had passed. One of her motivations might be to be able to maintain her independence. And so when you're having outcome-based conversations, you're helping her understand the why. It's, hey, listen, should or if something happens or when something happens, you are able to maintain, and people get that. And that's what helps them stay in the market or stay this or take this recommendation versus it has more upside. Another piece of this is, I'm going to read it how it's written here. A professional who was recommended by a trusted friend or colleague. Told you I'm from Georgia. I like simple. They want relationship. And we saw this even with Alexiss. Like the person didn't know me. 70% of women widowed will leave their advisor within the first year. And nobody ever asked them why. But we did. And the number one response we got from them was, we were looking for a better fit. So if we have relationships for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then where are we missing? So we need relationship. Now, Alexiss says something really important that talks about how specifically to work with this group. Number one, help them understand the decision-making process. Number two, education is a great space. Alexiss says she saw her advisor in the educational space first, and that's what helped her build trust. So if you could leverage your expertise to offer seminars, webinars, partner with a group of service aligned to a women's group, and you're offering your expertise and they get to see you in a safe space, thank you for that. That is what's going to really help you work with this group and also generate referrals. One more tangible thing, not listed here. I would encourage you to create an advisory council. Go to your top 5 female clients in your business and say, hey, listen, this year I've made a commitment. I want to work better with my women investors. And to do that, male or female, I need to have a better understanding of them. I'm reaching out to you because I'm hoping you and 4 other women can help me create what's needed to help give you what you want and need. And whether that's client events, whether it's seminars, that give them what they need. And you know what? If number 5 says, no, I don't want to do it, I don't have the time, it's okay, go to number 6, 7, 8, but get your advisory council. So I'll pause there, Liz, and I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I love it. And I love how this is very specific action items too. And this goes back to being curious. The very beginning of Cameos, you said it, and Quinton, you just armed them with very specific questions. It's discovery questions and taking the time to have these deeper conversations, which is why we have advisory boards. Advisory boards don't have to be a big thing in some hotel ballroom with catered lunch and, shiny jackets and, microphones. And it doesn't have to be like that, right? So think about who your advisory board is geared towards. What are you trying to get out of it? And ask specific questions that help you make your offering more robust. It's better than a how we doing conversation, right? It's more specific. So I love the questions here. By the way, as the audience, you will get these specific questions afterwards. Cameo, anything you want to add to that before we move to the next group, which millennials, I think, Quinton, would be the next one that you want to move to? Anything you want to add, Cameo, to some of Quinton's comments here?
Yeah, one thing that I would add here is just engaging and understanding, these women who are over 50 and understanding the things that they're interested in beyond just their personal finances, right? We talked about making authentic connections earlier. I think it goes beyond just the assets we're managing, right? Getting to know people as individuals, what types of organizations are these women interested in? And then you can even take it a step further, right? You can volunteer your time for some of these organizations that these women over 50 potential clients are interested in. That's yet another opportunity to connect with them on such a deeper level. And when we talk about relationship building, that's the foundation of it. What are people passionate about? what are they most interested in, and how can you plug into those items to really build a robust and long-term relationship, right? We don't want it to just be short-term. These are some things that you can think about.
I love it. Even just expressing interest. You want to get to know a spouse that you don't know, asking what they do in their free time. If they volunteer, go volunteer with them one day.
Absolutely.
Such a great, easy win. It's free. It's only, only costs your time. So love that. Let's talk about millennials. Millennials get such a bad rap, although the generation, I think it's Gen Z after us, is getting a bad rap now too. So I'm glad that we can pass the torch to teasing the next generation about their nuances. But millennials are a big group here. A lot of next generation clients are millennials. So I'm going to share a screen here. And Quinton, I love this slide of the myth versus fact. Millennial investors prefer robo-advisors.
Yes.
Robots are quicker, right, Quinton? This is what we
Yeah.
prefer. Is that true?
Okay, so the answer to the question, is it true? The answer is actually false. It's not true, especially the more affluent they are. You're right, millennials do get a bad rap. They get known for having quote unquote bad attitudes. And the way I like to reposition this story is you got to realize this group watched their parents, and I'm going to ask you to do the air quotes with me at home, right? So everybody put up the air quotes. They watched their parents do everything that they are supposed to do and lose a significant amount of money in the last downturn, despite the fact that you told them to stay in the market. But they didn't see that. They only saw the outcomes. Now, where this myth comes from is that we come up to them with our suit and ties or our blouses, and we say, hey, why don't you go do the same thing your parents just did? To which the reply is no. No.
Absolutely not.
Right.
If anybody's going to mess up this money, it's going to be me, right? So
I don't need help.
It's all online, right?
It's all online. And that's what millennials want, is they want control. And Kelly's laughing because Kelly knows it's true. And I know Kelly. So if you want to work with this group, a couple of things. Number one, you're going to hear this. Communication matters. You're going to hear people tell you, oh, get on social media. And yes, to Cameo's point earlier, we want a strong social media presence, but this group still values in-person communication. We talked about how to connect with this group. The family meeting structure that I gave you earlier is a bridge to this conversation. It helps you get there in a safer way. They can fill you out. They can build trust and relationship. So you can start to work with this group. We need to talk about values. For this group, let me say it this way. There's a joke that this group, you know what? They're very environmental friendly. They like to drive Priuses. I just came from the Bay Area for 2 weeks. They don't drive Priuses. They drive Teslas. I haven't figured out how they all can afford it yet, but they drive Teslas. Where millennials put their money is a direct reflection of their values. So if you want to work with this group, this is a space for you to consider ESG, how sustainable investing, how you can allow them to invest in names that align with their values and tell a different story there. Because it really matters to this group. Also being up to speed about what other alternative solutions are out there, how they work. It's not necessarily that they're going to go with them, but they want to know how they can compare to what you offer, and they want to be able to have a more robust conversation. So I'll pause there because I know we're tight on time, and I'll pass it to Cameo for thoughts.
I think you hit it spot on, Quinton. When I think about the advisors that I'm working with and the clients that they're looking to serve, those points you mentioned are spot on. And even so much, they're taking it a step further, and they're thinking about how can we meet the needs of these millennial investors and creating service models specifically for them. I have one client in particular now who is building a subscription-based model for millennial business owners specifically. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, but going back to what you said, Quinton, is you got to understand what motivates them, understand how they want to communicate, and understand what their needs are to really make that strong connection.
Well, and it's authentic. You mentioned this in our prep call, Cameo, authentic connection. So I know we're at the end of time. Would you mind ending? And I want something from Quinton too, like an action item we could be doing to make sure that if we're not going to do anything else we hear today, what is the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would challenge everyone on this call today, if you're here live or if you're watching the recording, is to find someone who is not like you in your office and go and introduce yourself. Go and introduce yourself and ask questions about that individual to get to know them and start to build a professional relationship where you can then support one another. And I know that may be out of some of our comfort zones, but this is what it's going to take. And so I encourage you to do that.
Love it. Wonderful. Thank you, Cameo. Quinton, what would you like to add?
One thing, I would encourage you to be vulnerable enough to have the conversation you need to have. Put your emotions aside, put your concerns aside about how you'll look, and have the conversations that you need to have, whether it's to diversify your practice, diversify your client relationships, to help people achieve better outcomes.
I love that. I love that. If you ever get to a point where you're in a conversation where you don't know which question to ask, my easy go-to, you've heard this before, all of you have, is if you were me, what should I be asking about that I'm not? And I love that question because it just changes the perspective. Like I could be missing something. What should we be talking about today? So one of my favorite questions I learned at a very young age, but I love the advice. So we are at time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and energy that they put into this discussion today and taking the time to listen and engage. Thank you so much. If you chatted in, we love the engagement. This recording will be available. We have a follow-up email with all of the resources reference how to get a hold of Quinton and Cameo if you want to further the conversation with them. Of course, you have full access to my team on the Practice Intelligence and Coaching Department. You can talk to any of us at any time. Franklin Templeton, Quinton specifically, thank you so much. And Atlas Park, Cameo specifically, we really appreciate you being here today. And thank you so much for giving us advice and guidance. And hopefully we will be seeing you again on another event. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. This was great. And thanks, Quinton.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.